Hello guys, welcome back. My name is Nathan, and today we're going to be talking about 10 different NHL players who I think will be traded during this 2021-2022 NHL season. Now, we've already seen some major action, obviously with the Jack Eichel trade, so we can scratch him off the list, but there's still some major talent out there that I think could be on new teams this year. But who do I see as the best players available that could be traded this season, and who will be the teams to actually trade for them around the trade deadline and throughout this year? Watch till the end for all of my trade predictions and all the trade targets, and make sure you hit that subscribe button if you are new. 60% of the people that are watching are not subscribed. If you like hockey, and if you like trade rumors, this channel is the place to be. Now, without further ado, let's get straight into the players who I think will be traded this season, and we're going to start out with a player that I think is absolutely 110% a trade deadline acquisition, even though there has been some trade rumors with him recently about a trade recently, potentially with the Edmonton Oilers. I still think this team will wait till the trade deadline to make a move with this player. First things first, we're going to start out today's video with Ben Chiarot, who is one of the most interesting players out there. There was a ton of rumors recently about a potential linkage to the Edmonton Oilers and potentially a first-round pick being exchanged, and I honestly would not be surprised if that is the case. I don't think Ben Chiarot is worth that, but for teams that want some playoff success, he was good in the playoffs last year, even though he is still a turnover machine and definitely isn't as good skating-wise as some other top-tier defensemen. But Ben Chiarot is interesting. He's going to be a rental. He's going to be a UFA after this year, and he has a $3.5 million cap hit at age 30, and so far this season in terms of totals, he's played upwards of 20 games with 4 goals, 1 assist, 5 points. But again, that playoff play was actually pretty decent, and he was a big part of that Montreal Canadiens top 4. And I think there would be a ton of teams out there needing some snarl on that defense that would love to acquire him. Obviously, the Edmonton Oilers are a pretty high-profile team in the mix, but I could also see a team like the Boston Bruins potentially want to add another defensive piece. And also an underrated team to me is the Colorado Avalanche, who I think are lacking a little bit of snarl, a little bit of craziness on that defense. And I feel like for them, they could maybe use a little bit of Ben Chiarot's strengths. Maybe you put him on a pair with Cale Makar, have Cale Makar be that great player who can get the puck out of the zone, but also Ben Chiarot is the great block shotter, the guy who can get in the dirty areas and make it work. I feel like that could be a very interesting pair, even though it's not exactly Colorado's blueprint. But again, a first-round pick is what seems to be likely in exchange for Ben Chiarot, and if the Habs are able to make that happen, they should take that trade any day of the week. But next up, we're going to move on to an even more interesting player on this list. Coming in at number 2 and the second player that I see being traded this season, I'm much less convinced that this will be 100% a trade deadline deal, though I still think it more likely would be. Next up, though, I'm going to go to a winger on Minnesota with Kevin Fiala, a player that I am really interested to see what happens next with, because his situation with Minnesota has been a little bit strained. With Dave Evison, it seems like that relationship has been kind of cut off completely. Right now, Fiala's not playing on any power play lines. He's not getting any of those opportunities, yet still has played pretty well this season. In 18 games played, he has 3 goals and 9 assists for 12 points, and even with not too many opportunities and a stray relationship with the head coach, has still done pretty well, and he's an RFA after this next season. He's right in the prime of his career at age 25. The main problem I see, though, Kevin Fiala, is that I don't know what Minnesota is going to want in a trade. We heard the rumors about potentially Minnesota wanting JT Miller and giving away Kevin Fiala and more on top of that, so maybe in this Kevin Fiala trade, there's a better player going back to Minnesota. That seems like the most likely bet, especially with Minnesota wanting to win the Stanley Cup as much as humanly possible this season. And even though Vancouver was a part of those trade rumors, it didn't seem like they had too much interest in Kevin Fiala, so the 3 teams I feel like are the most likely to trade for Kevin Fiala are the New York Rangers, the Anaheim Ducks, and especially the San Jose Sharks, who we're going to touch on a player later on that they could trade for Kevin Fiala that would be the better player that I think could work very, very well. Now, I want to clarify this before we get into the third player that will be traded. Do not trade for this player under any circumstance. Do not do it, okay? Do not do it, NHL GMs. In saying that, for the third player that'll be traded this season, I'm going to go to my favorite team, the Dallas Stars, and move on to goaltender Anton Khudobin. The 35-year-old tendy at age 35, I just said that, has a 3.333 cap hit for this season and next, so he wouldn't be a rental, but there's been 2 teams linked to him most recently, that being the New York Rangers and the Edmonton Oilers. For both of those teams, do not do it. Khudobin really, since the 2020 Cup final, has made, I was about to say he was Swiss cheese, but that would not be disrespectful to Swiss cheese, he has been absolutely awful, and this season especially has been even more disappointing. In 7 games played, he has an 8.73 save percentage, it pains me to even say it, and his goals hit above expected is one of the worst in the entire NHL this season. He has been awful and just horrible for this Dallas Stars team since that Cup final, and I really don't know if he has too much left in him, and especially since he isn't even a rental, I think for the Oilers and especially the Rangers, it would be a horrible trade to make. Now, we're going to go on to a little bit of a quick one here at number 4, the 4th player that I see being traded this season. We're going to move on to Steve Yzerman's Detroit Red Wings and move on to one of their biggest rentals in Vladislav Namestnikov. Now, let's be honest, Steve Yzerman's probably going to get at least 2 firsts for Namestnikov, but realistically, I think at least a second could definitely be there for the Red Wings if they stay patient. At age 29, Namestnikov's a pretty valuable player for the Red Wings and could be a pretty valuable player for a team trading for him. So far this year, has 10 points, 7 goals, 3 assists in 20 games played, and it's pretty obvious the Red Wings are trying to maximize the trade value on Namestnikov, playing him pretty high in the lineup, but sometimes as well. But I think when it comes to Namestnikov, he can still have some value, even though I think he's a little bit overrated. But this is a guy that I think could get a second-round pick at the deadline, especially with the way the trade market is looking like right now. It's not really amazing at this point, but a guy like Namestnikov, who is on pace for 41 points, could be a pretty solid acquisition for, again, anybody that needs a middle six winger and needs a lot more depth come playoff time. But now we're going to go to the most major pick of all. At number 5 and the 5th player that I see being traded at this year's trade deadline or throughout this season, let's move on to the Arizona Coyotes MVP in Phil the Thrill Kessel. Let's be honest, a trade is likely going to happen this year, and I feel like for Phil Kessel as well, that's the area he's trending towards. Obviously, this Coyotes team is not fantastic, and I feel like for Phil Kessel, in order to win that cup, I don't know if Arizona's quite the team to be able to get there, and he's 34 years old. He's getting up there in age, and so far this season, at this point with Arizona, in 19 games played, has 3 goals, 6 assists for 9 points, but last year, 43 points in 56 games for the Coyotes, did really, really well, and I feel like for a lot of teams out there, he could be a pretty interesting addition. Now, he would be a rental. He only has this year left in his deal, and he has a $6.8 million cap bid. In terms of teams that would actually be interested, let's be honest, a return to Toronto is the only team I want to actually see get it done. If he goes back to the Leafs, that would be a pretty fantastic story. It's definitely not going to happen, but I can dream. And next up, we're going to move on to number 6, and this next player wouldn't be a rental, so I don't think it's a slam dunk that he'll be traded. With the way this season is trending for his team, I really doubt that he'll be on the team next season and will live to tell the tale. We're going to move on to, well, that was dark. What? Anyways, we're going to move on to number 6, and for the 6th player that I see being traded this year, I'm going to move on to the Vancouver Canucks winger in JT Miller. Now, again, I said winger. He can't play both center and wing, and I feel like we've already seen the interest in the Minnesota Wild. I think there's going to be a lot of interest with JT Miller come trade deadline time. I think for the Vancouver Canucks, if you're just looking at picks, I think you could get a first and a second round pick on top of that deal for JT Miller. I feel like that could be the blueprint in a Miller deal, and so far this year with the Canucks, he's a point per game, doing pretty well, and again, even though there has been some lapses in defensive play, in terms of the point production and the offensive output, there's going to be a lot of teams feasting for a guy like that on that top 6. There are so many teams out there that could love to have a guy like that. I mean, Minnesota, we've already seen a ton of interest from, but other teams like the Boston Bruins potentially could be in play. I think there'll be a ton of teams out there, though, willing to give a first-round pick for JT Miller. If Ben Chiarot can get a first-round pick, I think JT Miller definitely can, and can get a lot more on top of it. Now, we're going to move on to another player in the Pacific Division who also has this year and next on his deal, but in my opinion, this is the exact perfect time for this team to actually be able to trade him, and they honestly could get a lot of value back as well. This was a player that even just a couple years ago, I thought almost had no value. This team would have had to give up picks to actually get rid of him, but with how well he's playing recently, that might not be the case. Going on to the next player, 7th player I see being traded this season, I'm going to move on to Jonathan Quick of the LA Kings. Now, obviously, Cal Peterson is the future, even if he hasn't looked like it so far this year, and Jonathan Quick's value might be at an all-time high over the past couple of seasons. He right now is at a 36-year-old age. Why am I just looking at this now? 35-year-old age, sorry. And again, has 2 years left on his contract at $5.8 million. And so far this year, he's been absolutely lights out and super underrated too. 10 games played, a .939 save percentage, and has been one of the main reasons why the Kings are over 500. While Cal Peterson has not really been that great, Jonathan Quick has stepped into the absolute absence and has been just amazing and has played some of his best hockey ever. I feel like for a ton of teams out there, they would love to have that presence of a guy that's won multiple Stanley Cups, that has that experience, and is also playing the way he has. I mean, I could see with Ken Holland's history of trading for guys like Duncan Keith, Jonathan Quick might be an answer there for Ken Holland at least. And it's an interesting question, honestly. If Jonathan Quick, let's say, has half of his salary retained, so he'd be around a $2.7 million contract. I can't do the math right now, I'm sorry. Let's say he is around that range and he is playing at a .930 level and he's a consistent starter for you, even though he is 35 years old. Would you give him a second round pick, a first round pick for him? I think it'll be definitely interesting to see if Quick's production continues, what he'll land at trade deadline time. But next up at number 8, we're going to go on to another Pacific Division player. This time kind of a much different case though with the San Jose Sharks. This is a player that I've been talking about a lot on the channel over the past few months, and even though San Jose is above 500 right now, I don't know how much longer they'll be above that range, and a player like Thomas Hertl is a guy who would get so much at this year's deadline. He to me is a guy that is so interesting to watch out for, and I have my eyes out for him, honestly, come trade deadline time. He's obviously going to be a rental, and right now has a $5.6 million cap hit. He would be super easy, though, for a lot of teams to bring on with how high of a level he brings on every single game. Now, so far this year, he has 7 goals, 5 assists, 12 points in 18 games played. Last year, 43 points in 50 games, and in my opinion, Thomas Hertl is one of the most underrated players out there. Even though that point production might not be elite, I think all the small little details he provides are so important, and for a second line center, I think he'd be perfect on a ton of playoff teams. I think teams like Minnesota, Boston should have honestly already traded for him already, but even teams like the New York Rangers, I think would be beautiful fits for Thomas Hertl come the trade deadline. But next up, we're going to go to number 9 and move on to the last defenseman of this list, moving on to the Buffalo Sabres and arguably their biggest rental piece in Colin Miller. Now, I know it's pretty crazy to talk about, but Colin Miller has actually done pretty well so far this season, and even though his point production is great, I think he's also played pretty great on top of that. The Colin Miller, by the way, at age 29, will be a rental. He makes $3.8 million. He's a right shot, right D, which, even though I don't care about it whatsoever, a lot of GMs seem to think that because it's more rare, it means it's so much more valuable, which isn't really the case, but it is what it is. And with Colin Miller, so far this year in Buffalo, he's ended up playing 18 games, getting 2 goals, 9 assists for 11 points. Pretty great production for a guy that hasn't really been a production beast for Buffalo in his time there so far, but this is a guy that has a pretty decent two-way game, has some good puck movement abilities, and is a guy that can hold his own skating-wise too. Not a lot of things that stand out with his game, but he's a solid defenseman that could fit in maybe as a 4th or 5th guy on a lot of playoff teams, and I think a ton of teams out there who would love to get Colin Miller, especially even for the price he might bring. He'll definitely be cheaper than Ben Sherratt in my opinion, and maybe could get a second round pick, maybe even late first if Buffalo plays their cards right. But now we're going to move on to the last player to talk about today, the 10th... I just bit my lip. The 10th spot on the list, and the 10th player that I see being traded at this year's trade deadline specifically, maybe even a little bit earlier, but I have my doubts about that. This is a player that, honestly, value-wise, is extremely hard to gauge, but I feel like having 1 year left in his contract is a pretty interesting thing to me, and I feel like there might actually be a lot of teams out there wanting to get his services. At number 10, I am going to go with Marc-Andre Fleury. Now, here's the thing. I don't know what he's going to get, because he's been awful so far this season. But I think there's a lot of teams out there that because he only has 1 year left, and he's Marc-Andre Fleury, and he has that name, I think there could be a lot of teams out there wanting to get him. Now, I don't know if Pittsburgh is going to be able to afford him. Obviously, I've heard a lot of speculation there. I don't really buy it, but I think there's a lot of teams out there that want to have that type of name and want to have that guy onto the books. Even though he hasn't been good, obviously the Chicago defense hasn't helped him too much, and I feel like there's a lot of teams out there that are willing to make a bet on a guy like that, which is still fine to me, but I really don't know what Fleury's going to get. Even if that salary is half retained at $3.5 million, that's still not super easy to bring on, especially if you're a goaltender. So I think that his chances are a little bit more limited that way, but I feel like there's a lot of teams out there that would love to have Marc-Andre Fleury and would love to bring him on. But that'll be it for today, guys. Thank you so much for watching. If you did enjoy, make sure you hit that like button, subscribe, and hit that notification bell if you haven't already. Comment down below what you guys think about my pick picks. Do you guys think these guys will be traded, and who do you think will be traded from your favorite NHL team and all the NHL teams throughout this season? Let me know your thoughts, and let me know if you agree or disagree with my picks as well. Make sure you share this video with your friends, get it out there to anybody you guys know online, and click on this card right here for all my trade content right in one playlist. My name is Nathan. Have a great day, and I'll see you in the next one. Goodbye.